Just ahead, there's another edition of the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and in the Orlando area of Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political raconteur Al Spry. We are going to talk politics with one of the best in the business.
A good friend of this program for many years, and we have him on 2, 3, 4 times a year. Rhodes Cook will be joining us from Massachusetts today, which is a bit of a change for him. We know you'll enjoy this conversation, so stay put. The Florida Roundtable begins following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks and in the Orlando area of Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith, Public Affairs Director of the Florida News Network.
And I'm political commentator Al Spry. We're going to be talking about a lot of interesting things with Rhodes Cook, I imagine.
Yes.
State-wise.
Yeah.
Let's talk gaming.
Okay.
Or gambling.
Yeah.
You can call it either one. If you're a politician, you say gaming. And if you're losing money at the slot machine, you say gambling.
You're gambling, yes.
How you're gambling it all away. We are having some interesting things with Scott, who's trying to now dictate the future of gaming in Florida. He is applying his negotiating skills, of course, with his when he ran that huge hospital company to deal with the Seminole tribe. Of course, this is going to dictate the future of gaming in Florida. The Seminole tribe owns the Hard Rock franchise of hotels and casinos, a very powerful tribe, the most powerful tribe here in Florida. This is known as a compact. It could open the door to swanky resort casinos in Miami-Dade County and Broward County, or it could force them to remain off limits indefinitely. It could allow for dog racing to be replaced by arcade-style games, or it could do nothing, leaving in place the status quo, so to speak. But we're not really. The governor's still keeping his cards close to his vest about this. So we'll have to figure out where we're going to be headed gaming-wise. Right now, we're in that kind of.
I think it's interesting, too, because of the fact that, to a large extent, the Seminoles got this because they were not covered by state laws.
Right.
They brought all this in under federal jurisdiction, and it took some shuffling for the state of Florida to get a cut out of this whole thing. So I really do think that they have to tread very carefully as they go into this.
Well, they do. It's like you're negotiating with a foreign nation. The Indian tribes in America are considered nations.
Yep.
They're not under the jurisdiction of the federal government. So that's interesting. But here's something related to that. Brooks Robinson, the Hall of Fame baseball player.
Yeah.
Well, a few years ago, he plunged 6 feet from an unsecured stage. I don't know what that means. How do you secure a stage? What do you put a fence around it?
I guess no.
How about just don't walk off the edge of a stage?
You didn't see the
just
edge.
Stay back from the stage.
Yeah.
I always hear about these people falling off stages. Are they drinking? I mean, are they just blind? But anyway, this guy unfortunately plunged 6 feet from an unsecured stage 2 years ago. He's suing the Seminole tribe for $10 million for his permanent injuries. Whether he's going to collect enough even to cover his medical bills is an open question. This is what makes this an interesting story. Under the state's legal agreement with the Seminole tribe, if someone is injured at a tribal casino and wants to sue, the payment is capped at $200,000 per person and $300,000 per incident. The same state limits enjoyed when it's sued for negligence. So when the state is sued, in other words.
Yeah.
A victim suffering from a significant injury, though, can blow through that kind of money pretty quickly. What is that, a day or two at the hospital?
Yeah, really, that's about right. Yeah.
So we'll have to see how it goes for poor Brooks Robinson, but I think the man should just stay off of stage. Stay away from that.
Yeah.
Stay away from that.
Exercise a little bit of a care here and there.
They should just keep him far back from the edge.
Yeah, yeah.
And so kind of thing.
Well, tell you what, it's been about 4 months since we had a visit with Rhodes Cook. We opened this political year, this off-year elections, with his look around, and here we are. A third of the year has gone by, so we have invited him to come back and give us an update on how he thinks the chips are settling as we approach November. And I think that you will find his analysis, as always, interesting and pretty much right on target as we go.
And we're going to try not to say the words Clinton or Bush during that entire conversation with Rhodes. That's going to be our goal.
There you go. I think that's would be a great idea. Well, you are listening to the Florida Roundtable, which is a service of the Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, Tough TV in the Orlando area. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And we'll continue in a moment. We're back. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and in the Orlando area on Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry. It's great to be here, Reagan, with you, of course, and our guest.
Our guest is a gentleman that's been here many times, and we are delighted to say welcome back to Rhodes Cook Esquire, author of the Rhodes Cook Letter. Rhodes, how are you, sir?
Not bad, Reagan, and good to be with you again.
You are joining us today from Amherst, Massachusetts, where the weather is a little bit cooler than it is in Washington, D.C., but I know that you are still continuing to do the wonderful research that you do that goes into your newsletter that comes out around 10 times a year, and by golly, we always look forward to having you with us to get your take on what in the world is going on politically here in Florida and across the nation. Folks, if you don't know, Rhodes really does keep his thumb on the pulse of what is happening. This man is a font of knowledge of the Congress, of the Senate, of the presidency, and anyhow, Rhodes, it's good to have you back. We really like this. Well, let me ask you now. Here we are. It's been about 4 months since we chatted with you last time. And off-year elections, are we starting to take shape and see some things happening? Paint us a broad picture, and then we'll get down into some specifics with you.
Okay. Well, I think the lay of the land right now in terms of the 2014 midterms, the conventional wisdom is the Republicans are in good shape, in better shape than the Democrats, but with a caveat that things can change dramatically in the months ahead. First of all, they have history on their side. Midterm elections, and particularly second midterm elections like we have this time for President Obama, can be very dicey. They're usually a very large anti-incumbent type of feeling, particularly toward the president's party, that builds over the course of his administration as a kind of fatigue sets in, and people are looking forward to the next president. I'm not sure if we're really quite to that point yet in terms of any dire terms, but the history is daunting for the Democrats. Usually the president's party loses seats in the House and the Senate, and particularly there's in that 6th-year election, there's even a term for it, the 6-year itch. That kind of describes the frustration of voters at that point in time.
So would you describe... I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt, but I just want to say, would you describe Obama as a lame duck yet, or is he getting towards that stage? Or
I think yes and no, I think, Al. No, for practical terms. Usually he doesn't really become a lame duck, I would say, until you begin the year before his final year, which would be 2015. I think, through the these midterm elections, he can still put his stamp on things, pretty much. But once the calendar turns, then media focus is almost exclusively on the next presidential election. Who's running, who's raising money, who's ahead, what have you. And the president is often kind of shunted off to side except in times of crises. So I don't think we're quite there yet, but we are, approaching that point. I don't know if I can run through some of these other points so very quickly, if you'd like. The maps favor the Republicans in both the Senate and the House. That they will be waging battle on friendly terrain there for Congress. Recent Supreme Court decisions seem to have helped them in terms of raising money, starting with the Citizens United case a couple of years ago, and then there was a recent Supreme Court case called the McCutcheon decision, which increases the amount of money which can be put into play by wealthier donors. And they have control of many of the states already, so they can go on the offensive in areas like voter identification and cutting early polling hours and things like that. I think the things that the Democrats have in their favor at this point, maybe the biggest, is that they've been there before in terms of midterm elections. Particularly, they weren't really prepared for 2010, and they really took a big hit in the governor's races and in the House of Representatives. They managed to barely hold on to the Senate. But they really weren't, I think, prepared for the type of wave, that hit them that time. I think this time they are, from the start, trying to find ways to rouse their base, which they were unable to do back in 2010. And they have two of the probably most prominent national politicians in the country to do that, in President Obama and former President Bill Clinton. They each have their strengths, each have their weaknesses, but their strengths are probably a bit complementary, in that Obama is probably best at raising money at this point and framing issues, while Clinton is, probably best at going out on the stump, particularly in states that he won, but Obama didn't, and, states maybe like Louisiana or Kentucky, where he's already been. And also there's an opening for the Democrats in the governorships this time around. This is the one area where the Republicans are exposed and have far more gubernatorial seats in play than the Democrats do. So, in a nutshell, I think that's where people see the lay of the land at this point. One other asset of sorts for the Democrats is that the economy is probably in better shape than it was in 2010. Certainly the unemployment rate is down significantly from 2010. It was about 10%. Approaching November of 2010, it's down under 7% now. That's nationwide. And I think the situation in Florida is probably even better than that. I mean, if you see the gubernatorial race, you see the Governor Scott running a lot on an economic rebound, in Florida. So clearly the picture is not as bad as it was in 2010.
Well, since you mentioned it, just the other day here, Governor Scott got a huge, in fact, got half the page of A4 in the Wall Street Journal the other day.
Owned by Rupert Murdoch. We have to say that, of
yes.
course.
It does say that the polls show him in a tight race with his predecessor. And the gist of the article is, did his actions or the national turnaround lower the jobless rate? And Sean Snaith, who is the director of the University of Central Florida's Institute for Economic Competitiveness, says that by addressing the budget shortfall very quickly, inflicting short-term pain but stabilizing state finances, that Mr. Scott may well have aided what is going on here in Florida. And, of course, Mr. Christ says he's going to focus on increasing spending on schools and higher education and trying to make the state's workforce more competitive and diverse. Rhodes, I think, and I wonder what you're hearing from folks around the nation on this, but I don't think there's much question that we're probably facing the most expensive gubernatorial election, maybe not only in Florida history, but possibly in the history of the whole country. I think these guys may even outstrip what goes on in California.
Yes, probably would. You'll have a lot more competitive race in Florida than you would in California or Texas, or New York. The states that are bigger, about the same size as Florida. Yes, I don't know if I have much to add to what you say there. I mean, I think it's a fascinating race with one of the Republican newbies of 2010, someone who took advantage of the national tide that was running in the party's direction and trying to win re-election when that tide is probably, if there is a tide, it's not going to be quite as great. And as I say, there's sometimes an anti-incumbent feeling that would be particularly felt in the governor's races this year. And Governor Scott will be running for the first time as an incumbent with a record of his own. And it's, for all practicality, it's been a controversial record. So it's kind of a who knows, and I don't mean to try to be cute there, but it's a case of Florida being just about an evenly divided state.
It seems like, but that's the country, though, pretty much an evenly divided country.
Well, I would say the country is evenly divided, but that's because you're adding together halves of the country that are strongly one way or the other. And so when you look at it in the aggregate, it's evenly divided, but there are not that many states that are evenly divided within themselves. And Florida is one of maybe a handful. You can think of maybe a few others: Pennsylvania, Ohio, Virginia, maybe North Carolina. There are a few other, maybe a few Midwestern states, but you probably have just a handful of states that really reflect this national divide that is about even. And Florida is the biggest of those.
Governor Scott has already started his advertising campaign. He's in his second cycle commercials already. It was what's it going on now, Al? About 3 or 4 weeks, I think. Yeah. And so he is spending, and I go. The polls show that it's tight, but Mr. Christ is ahead. But 4 years ago, nobody thought that Rick Scott could beat Congressman Bill McCollum in a Republican primary either. And neither of them particularly favorites of the Tea Party or anything at that point. Golly, he's just got so much money available to him, and I keep thinking, are we going to buy another election here? And the Christ people putting out press releases, but no advertising as yet. So, but the race is on here, obviously.
Yes, well, the spending has really gotten almost to the point where it's tough to track anymore, particularly as I alluded to the recent court decisions. In some cases there's much more third-party spending going on than there were a few years back. And so money is being poured in not only by the candidates, it's coming from the parties, and it's coming from independent sources, if you would, on each side, though I think the Republican Koch brothers have gotten the most attention, for their group spending. So there's money to burn, literally here, in a state like Florida, and sounds like you're seeing much of the smoke going up already.
It is. I'll tell you that. Rhodes, tell you what, I want to take a moment here and remind folks that they can visit your website, rhodescook.com. There's information there on how they can subscribe to your newsletter, which is one of the finest in the entire country. You've seen Rhodes on ABC and different networks and whatnot about 10 times a year. And if you are a political junkie, this is for you. More information and things to make your arguments with than on both sides of the aisle, and that's one of the things that Al and I like about it. Well, let us remind you that you are listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and in Orlando of Tough TV. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
Our special guest is Rhodes Cook. We'll continue our conversation following these messages. From Pensacola to Key West and all points in between, you're listening to the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and in the Orlando area of Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
Our very special guest this day, the author of the Rhodes Cook Letter, Mr. Rhodes Cook himself. Check it out at rhodescook.com. I look forward to every single issue of this. Rhodes delves into the elections and divides and subdivides, and the numbers are crunched, and it's all there to explain where we have been, and which, of course, is a pretty good notion to show us where we're going to. And Rhodes, it's always nice to have you with us. I want to take a little look around the country. Of course, the state of Florida does not have a Senate seat open this year. We've got one Democrat and one Republican, but there are a number of Senate seats in play, and one that, since you're up there in Massachusetts, I'll ask you about what you're hearing there. Scott Brown, who spent a couple of years in the Senate filling out Ted Kennedy's unexpired term as a Republican, is now talking about moving to New Hampshire to take on the Democratic senator in New Hampshire. What are you hearing about that?
Well, he has moved, and he has announced his candidacy.
Aha.
And there was a poll in the Boston Globe a couple of days ago that showed him within about 7 points of Jeanne Shaheen, the Democrat incumbent. And so that's a pretty good start for Brown. He lends himself to the charge of being a carpetbagger, quite literally, though he talks about all the time he has spent in the state beforehand. But to give up, a career in Massachusetts and then cross the line, I mean, you become the ultimate carpetbagger. However, New Hampshire is possibly the most marginal of the New England states. It's kind of like Florida. It's pretty evenly divided, and it has that live free or die ethos, which conservative Republicans love. So the campaign is underway. He's moved his pickup truck across the line, and he's got it fueled up, and he's crisscrossing the state, which doesn't take that long.
Right.
And this is another pickup opportunity now for the Republicans. They broadened the map again in their favor. The problem for the Democrats in terms of the Senate is that they have a number of seats on hostile terrain, if you would, seats that went for the Republican presidential candidate back in 2012. I'm looking at the list in front of me, and I count 7 of the 21 Democratic Senate seats up this year in states that Romney won, compared to only 1 Republican seat in a state that Obama won, and that one seat held by Susan Collins in Maine is not considered to be in any jeopardy. But if you go down through the list of those Democratic seats, you can see the a path for the Republicans to gain the 6 seats they would need to win this fall in order to gain control of the Senate. As I say, there are 6 alone in states that Romney won by 10 or more percentage points in 2012. So anyway, it's and then in addition to that, you have a state like New Hampshire, which we were just discussing, which was actually an Obama state, but not one that Obama won by that much in 2008. He won it by about 5 percentage points. So it is a competitive state. And Republicans have reached out to put in good candidates in many of these competitive states, as well as those which are red states.
So, 4 years ago, in 2010, and again, actually during the presidential campaign too, we saw what I would call senatorial bloopers on the part of Republicans, open mouth and insert foot. And it's very difficult to get away from that.
Usually about women and women's health.
Now, so far this season, I haven't seen any of that. Do you think maybe they're paying more care in selecting candidates? Or nothing's happened just yet.
Give it time, Rick.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, you're right. I think you're quite right that the screening of candidates by the party establishment and their allies, say like the Chamber of Commerce or new groups that have been established like Main Street Partnership, have kind of filtered out some of the more difficult cases that the Republicans might nominate. This is a year where the establishment fights back. And I think you're seeing that in the early primaries. The Tea Party is going after a number of Republican veteran Senate incumbents, and I don't think more than one at this point is considered very vulnerable, and that's Kat Cochran over in Mississippi. It looks like in the other primaries that the incumbents are going to win pretty handily, and that is part and due to the fact that the Republican establishment is weighing in to these primaries and trying to make sure that the Christine O'Donnells or Richard Murdochs or Todd Akins of the world are not going to win nominations in 2014 as they did in 2010 or 2012.
Wanted to change gears here. We had Kathleen Sebelius recently resign, head of Health and Human Services, caught up in that brouhaha about the website for Obamacare. 5 years on the job. How do you rate her performance? Was she forced out? What's your thoughts on that? What about the person taking her place? What are your thoughts on the whole thing there politically?
Well, politically, I don't think she is going to cast a long shadow over this election. I think it'll be Obamacare itself. And the good news there for the Democrats is they're finally getting some good news. In terms of enrollments, I think there have been 7.5 million enrollees in the program. The premiums are not as high in many cases as were initially predicted, as were the costs of the program. But the problem is that many people already have their judgments hardened in concrete on what they think about Obamacare. The first impression has already been made, as has the second or the third. So moving back to Ms. Sebelius, I guess she will be most identified with the flawed rollout of the program, but she also must be given credit for staying with it and kind of tackling, this gargantuan project, which has eaten up past administrations, were unable to get any type of health care reform at all. So I think she'll have a mixed legacy, and her successor, I think, is a less politically, well, let me put it this way, somebody not out of the elected politics like Ms. Sebelius was as a governor of Kansas, probably more of a policy person, and I think at this point in time that's all to the good.
All right. Well, once again, it is time for us to take a little bit of a pause along the network line here. We want to take a moment to remind you that we are chatting with Rhodes Cook. He is the author of the Rhodes Cook Letter. Visit rhodescook.com. floridaroundtable.com. This is a newsletter, comes out about 10 times a year, and it is just chock full of all kinds of wonderful political information that you can use in your water cooler discussions around the office or in an argument over the backyard fence, if you do that kind of a thing in your neighborhood as well. Well, let us remind you that you are listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And we will continue our conversation with Rhodes Cook when the Florida Roundtable resumes following these messages. You're listening to the Florida Roundtable, the service of Florida's talk and entertainment networks, and in the Orlando area of Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And our very special guest this day is Rhodes Cook. He has been a regular on this program lo these many years. I think I've even lost track of how long we've been doing this with you, Rhodes, but it is always a pleasure to have you with us, and we know how busy you are, and we're delighted when you take time out of your busy schedule to spend a few minutes with us. Let me ask you, before we have to run away, is there a particular race on the horizon, a governor's race, the House, the Senate, that in the back of your mind you're saying this one could be an upset or one that we ought to kind of keep an eye on?
Oh, boy.
Not a fair question, but I asked it.
Yeah, I asked it anyway. Well, I would not pick out just one at this point. I would say I'm trying to think of the places that I am basically most familiar with and am kind of deluged by their material and the like. I always liked my home state of Pennsylvania to watch. I must say, it's a battleground state that probably doesn't get the credit that it deserves as such. But there is a governor's race there this year involving one of the class of 2010 incumbents, a fellow by the name of Tom Corbett, who is seeking a second term. He has, I guess he's a bit like Governor Scott, and he's had to suffer through low approval ratings much of his term, but he has a Republican legislature behind him, and he also has a large field of Democratic candidates vying to challenge him while he is virtually unopposed himself for renomination. So I look at his situation as something of a bellwether for the country as a whole, and it isn't quite the case maybe as Pennsylvania goes, so goes the nation, but it is a state worth watching, I think, that often doesn't get as much attention as it deserves. But any of those states, I think the battleground, if you look at the national elections in recent years, they've basically been decided in that swath of states that go from Pennsylvania west across the Great Lakes to Wisconsin, in Illinois and Missouri and Minnesota. They're kind of the old line industrial states, if you would, but ones that are pretty evenly divided by and large in terms of their politics. And they tend to have gone for Obama in presidential elections, but both voted Republican for governors. And as a result of that, after 2010, they were able to create congressional district maps that favored the Republicans, and that's one reason why the Republicans have a congressional majority, is because they were able to draw the maps in many of these rather evenly divided industrial states. And I'd throw in Florida as well, too, because it was the same dynamic there, creating a large Republican advantage at the congressional level that belies the rather evenness of the state politics.
Yeah, the old gerrymandering tactic, which has gone on for a long time.
Yes, And that's really something that has had great effect in what are evenly divided states. At the state level, the ability to gerrymander can create a huge advantage for one party or the other, and since 2010, that's been the Republicans.
Let me ask you this, because obviously the party that gerrymanders best. Let's look at that, what you talked about earlier. I just wanted to recap. There have been those two Supreme Court decisions regarding campaign financing. Really, there are no more campaign finance laws. They've all pretty much been struck down, which means you can give pretty much unlimited amounts of money to candidates, which of course favors the upper classes who have the money. How does this hurt? How does this hurt the voters, the average voter? I mean, do you see a lot of disenfranchisement now between that and these voter registration laws, voter ID laws, and limited times for voting?
You know what, guys?
We're out of time.
We're out of time, so
we'll have to hold that for next
Rhodes,
time.
You're going to have to mark that question down, and we'll save it for our next visit a couple of months down the road and see how we do. But let me remind you that this is the Florida Roundtable. I'm Reagan Smith.
I'm Al Spry.
And the Rhodes Cook Letter. Check it out at rhodescook.com. Rhodes, thank you so much for being with us this day, and we look forward to that next visit.
You're quite welcome, and I do too.
And I'll tell you what, if you folks will stay put along the network line, Al and I will be back with a closing thought following these messages. This is the Florida Roundtable, a service of Florida's Talk and Entertainment Networks, and in the Orlando area of Tough TV 38. I'm Reagan Smith.
And I'm Al Spry.
And always a pleasure to have Rhodes Cook with us. I enjoy his analysis, and by golly, over the years, he's been pretty darn accurate, Al.
He's very good. Rhodes is, he knows his stuff.
Yeah.
He studies this stuff. If I had to study this stuff, I'd be, chewing on Tums every day as much as he does. I study it, but he is obsessed.
It's his life. It's his life, and it shows.
Let's talk about the winner and loser of the week in politics. The winner is David Jolly. Boy, he's just he's been winning and winning, and he kept a campaign promise to vote against his leadership's budget proposal. Okay. That makes him a winner.
Yeah.
In a Tampa Bay Times Florida Insider poll, 3 out of 4 said Alex Sink would be unwise to challenge Jolly again in November. Mm-hmm. And national Democrats have no strong plan B should Sink take a powder, which I don't know. Sink just doesn't win. No. Loser of the week is the Florida Correctional Officers. As the 2014 legislative session winds down, it looks increasingly unlikely that Florida's prison guards will see the kind of long-sought pay raise to bring them more in line with other law enforcement officials. They always seem to get the short shrift there. And they have one of the hardest jobs.
They do.
To deal with prisoners.
You'd have to have one heck of a cell to get me to put on one of those uniforms and go inside.
Yes, and another thing would be a hard sell would be getting me to go to Kabul, Afghanistan. A friend of mine was offered work out there.
Yeah.
And it's just not a happy place.
No.
I wouldn't recommend it.
Not even after all these years of our presence. It's not safe.
No, it's not safe.
I mean,
Reagan, our presence has made it less safe, I think, to tell you the truth.
And as we have deadlines, Al-Qaeda's just laying back. The Taliban
laying back,
just waiting for us to totally disappear, and they're back.
They're sipping pina coladas. They're laying on the beach. They're getting rub downs. They're just hanging out.
If you had some pictures of that I would pay to see.
I've been told this. Is what I've been told.
Yeah. It's a very iffy situation. How about if we put it that way?
Well, I think that it is. We just had a famous AP reporter and a famous AP photographer who were just waiting in a check line, get shot by a policeman who shouted Allahu Akbar.
Who was on our side.
And this is a cop.
Yeah. Supposed to be on our side.
If you can't trust the Taliban, obviously, and you can't even trust the people that we're putting in power, What's going to happen there? But not many people are talking about Afghanistan. It's a dirty little secret.
And they're going to get a new president here soon, too. So that will play into everything as well. Well, I'll tell you what, one of these days we'll get one of those Afghan experts to come on and discuss all this with us at length.
But not in person. I don't want to get shot. You know what I mean, Ray?
That's right. We want to say thank you for your time this day, and also invite your comments. Send us an email. We still get snail mail here at the Florida News Network. So let us know what you think of the program.
Al
who you
Spry
might like to hear.
at clearchannel.com.
There you go.
Hit me up. Hit me up.
All right. We'll see you again with the Florida Roundtable.
You've been listening to Florida Roundtable, a weekly look at issues and problems of concern to Floridians from a state, national, and international perspective. Presented by the Florida News Network with your hosts, Reagan Smith and Al Spry. The views and opinions expressed during the preceding program are solely those of the participants and not necessarily those of this station's ownership, management, or sponsors of FNN. Your views and opinions are welcome. Address your card or letter to Florida Roundtable in care of Reagan Smith, 2500 Maitland Center Parkway, Suite 407, Maitland, Florida, 32751. Or you may email reagansmith@fnnonline.com. Thank you for listening, and please join us again next week for another edition of Florida Roundtable.